teachers have been teaching virtually for almost a whole year now. What lessons have been learned for teachers this past year, and what do teachers still need help with with virtual learning?
Well, I mean, I think that you are right on in saying there's been a lot of learning that teachers have had in the past, what now, 10 months, almost a full year of distance learning. We've had to adopt new technology in our work. A lot of teachers have made personal investments in things like camera lights and other peripheral equipment, if not upgrading their own laptops and so forth in order to meet the needs that students have and to meet the instructional needs that the curriculum requires, the curriculum adjustments require. You know, in terms of the rollout of distance learning, none of us had training on that in our education programs. There are a few of us who have had online courses we have taken. Some have, there have been a few of us who've had online experiences with students K-12, but for the most part, this is not something that we've ever had professional development on, so we had to learn it as we were going. And I am so proud of what our teachers have been able to do. There are so many words of thanks that folks have been getting from parents, from students, about the extra effort that teachers have made. And I think, you know, one of the big takeaways is this is a lot harder. And obviously the results aren't as good as when we can be in person. You know, we are working hard to make it a rich learning environment, but there's nothing to substitute for in-person connection, because of course, as many folks have noted, this is a social experience, not just an intellectual experience to be in school. So, you know, I think that's one of the big takeaways for us is teachers have been very adaptable and have worked really hard to make it as good as we can during a really tough time.
Recently, Governor Hogan set a goal at one of his news briefings to have all schools, all public schools in Maryland reopen in some sort of capacity, hybrid, something to get teachers back in the classroom, students back in the classroom if they choose by March 1st. Do you think this goal is possible?
Well, you know, certainly that would be our hope as well, that we could get back into schools, because this is harder for us doing it this way. It's it's harder to be really knowing where your kids are and how they're doing. And we know that in person works best. I think that it's an aspirational goal that he has put out. I think the governor means well in wanting our students to be in getting the education they need in the best way possible. Where we have concerns as teachers and educators is the fact that we need to have proper ventilation. We need to have the PPE. We need to make sure we're able to ensure social distancing. You know, I feel for our superintendent and the Board of Education, who are trying to figure out how to deal with 165,000 students and the different needs that they have from family to family and community to community. So, you know, we are eager to get back to school, but we must do so safely. And coordinating that is a huge undertaking.
What do you think are the biggest steps needed to get for teachers to feel more comfortable getting back in the classroom? Is it making sure there's enough PPE? Is it getting vaccinated? Does some teachers feel differently, like maybe this one teacher is more comfortable than another?
With 14,000 Montgomery County teachers, you know, we have a range of opinions and a range of needs also. We have a range of ages and health conditions ourselves, and our family members have different circumstances. Many of our teachers are also parents of children who are in Montgomery County schools or other school systems. They don't always live in this county. So there are complications that we have that each person has to address in figuring out, you know, Am I ready to go back or not? And then the real need that we all have is for a consistent plan and vaccine planning is a part of that. That is something that our members really want to know. You know, the governor has said we are now able to get the vaccine, but where is the vaccine? You know, folks are scrambling to find places where we can get it. And I don't know how many of our members have so far been vaccinated, but I don't think it's a huge portion, because mostly what I see is folks are scrambling to try to get appointments somewhere and not having success.
Is that
You know, the other thing that we need to make sure we have is a right to transparency about what is going on in the buildings. That's something that educators will feel much more comfortable about returning to schools when we know that we can know about the air quality, when we can know about what kinds of cases there may have been in the community, and we know what the protocols are for how to handle those possibilities and those problems that might arise. We want to make sure that we get timely notification about potential exposure. We want the right to refuse to work in unsafe conditions. So, you know, that is really just following current OSHA law, that last piece about, you know, being able to say, hey, this is not a safe space for me to be working in. You know, the thing I'd like you to remember is that learning is happening. The classroom, the physical classroom isn't open, but learning is happening. And teachers are working tremendously hard to make the safest option right now work the best we can. And when we do go back to school in the building, we're not going to be back normal 5 days a week, all your classes there every day. This is going to be you know, an added complication. Kids will be in, they'll be out. You know, most of the time, they'll still be out of the school building when they're doing their learning. So it's not as if back to school is back to normal. Far from it. Back to school buildings is going to be a really difficult and strange experience. Children are going to have to stay separate from one another. You know, there won't be any clustering over a Bunsen burner in the chemistry lab. There's not going to be little reading circles the way there normally would be. You know, everybody's going to have to be at a distance. So it means a lot more independent work, a lot less proximity with the teacher, and, you know, a much more regimented experience, I would say, than what students would ideally get in the public schools.
How are teachers feeling with the vaccine rollout now? I know you spoke a little bit about this, but do they feel like they have been prioritized in the right? Do you think they're in the right place in line right now? Because right now we're vaccinating people over 75 in Montgomery County. That's where we are. And I know that the county announced a partnership with Johns Hopkins Medicine where teachers can get vaccinated. But how are they feeling about where we are in the county right now with our vaccine rollout?
Well, I think teachers are like every resident of Montgomery County right now, and the DMV area. We're all confused, you know, because it is not, the access is different depending on whether you're looking at county administration or state administration of the vaccine. You know, the programs have different rules, and then finding a place that where one can get an appointment if you're trying to get it on your own is very difficult. And where is the vaccine? That, you know, our understanding is that there just isn't the amount of it available to get to the people who are in line for it. The school system, to its credit, is trying to set up a system where we will be notified when it's available. And I believe that there are people there've been some folks who've been notified, and they're getting appointments established through Johns Hopkins or through DHHS, but that is not by any means a great host of people who have those appointments, and I don't know of that group who's been vaccinated. So, you know, that's the uncertainty and the anxiety related to vaccines. What we would love to see, you know, the governor recognizing the reality of the limitations that we're under right now. I think our superintendent and the Board of Education have been more cognizant of the fact that we just simply don't have the supply. So pressing people to return to schools is not appropriate until there's a clear structured plan with a clear rollout for the vaccine.
The governor in his press conferences has kind of pointed to private schools, saying private schools have done it. There's been less data showing that there's much spread there. If they can do it, it can happen safely, then the public schools can jump on board. Do you agree with this assessment?
Well, I think there are a couple of things at play here. First of all, private schools have opened and closed again because of COVID cases. It's not as if it's been, a risk-free venture. The other thing is, a small private school is not 165,000 kids in a huge county like Montgomery County, where, the bus system alone for Montgomery County is a huge undertaking to figure out how to get kids safely to and from school. Private schools, people rely on personal vehicles to get kids to school oftentimes. We don't necessarily have that opportunity for many of our students in Montgomery County. And when you're talking about our high schools with, over 2,000 kids in a building, that's a lot different from a smaller private school with, with smaller classes and more space and just fewer numbers to coordinate. So, I think that there are just the logistical difficulties that have made this harder for us. The other piece of it is that we've been underfunding our schools for so long that a lot of the deferred maintenance on things like HVAC systems really has created a crisis for us here in our across the country, but here in Montgomery County, we're certainly seeing it brought into high relief that places where there's been deferred maintenance, now that's got life and death health implications for the people who use those buildings for work and for learning.
Can you tell me about the kind of conversations Montgomery County's Education Association has been having with state and local officials, like county health officials, the school board? What have those been like? Where are maybe you finding the most common ground or the most disagreement, if there's any?
Well, I think the big thing is everyone wants our students to be safe and wants our staff to be safe. And our superintendent speaks a lot about wanting to make sure that we have an intact school system infrastructure when we go back to the buildings. So the fact that trying to make sure that our workforce is kept whole so that we're ready to go back. I think that has been a really good point of commonality. It's the how we get there has been where there have been, places where we've had to negotiate and have conversation. But those negotiations with the school board have been going well. I think that we're close to an agreement. And, as I say, the big things are we want to make sure that we have transparency, the right to refuse unsafe working conditions, the right to have timely notification, and that we make sure that we're addressing equity issues when we come back into schools, because we know that our Black and Brown students, our students living in poverty, have been much more severely affected by all of this, and that we need to make extra effort. Again, this is where underinvestment in the schools for many years has created a bigger problem. I think it's also COVID's creating an opportunity, though. Honestly, as we do go back to buildings, this is a time when we can reinvest. If the county has taken an economic hit because of COVID, the way to boost our economy is to make sure that we're investing in education to make sure we continue to have world-class public schools and that draw business, that draw educated workers, that produce educated workers for the economy. So I think that, there's more agreement than disagreement here locally.
And talk to me more about the issue of equity. For some teachers, there's going to be obviously a learning gap. For teachers of students in the lower grades, what specific resources do they need to help close the learning gap that has been created because of COVID?
Sure. Well, the big thing in making sure that you can educate a child is having time with that child, right? So there are different things that we can start to work on to see whether we need to have summer programs or after school or extended day programs that would help to make up some of that learning, to have tutoring available for students. You know, a big thing is when class sizes are huge, you can't give that individual attention that students need. I think that, you know, one of the things that's going to be essential is making sure we've got adequate staffing to really address the needs of children, to make sure that we're tailoring the learning for students. Some are doing better in distance learning. They find the lack of distraction is helpful to them. The being able to self-pace their lessons is helping them. But for others, it's been really, really difficult. And there's going to be work to do to bring them to where they should be as at their age and grade. So, as we come back in, I know that our union's been very interested in collaborating with the school system, and there's been an expressed interest on the part of MCPS to work with us in figuring out what we can do. Anything that we do to catch things, students up to where they need to be, is going to take funding. And so making sure that we have the community's commitment to paying for the things that need to happen, that's the reality that we face. There's only so much that you can do if the resources are not there. And teachers are already going full bore. And it's not that we don't, we're not saying, no, I won't do it for the kids. There's just a human factor of what is actually possible for one human being to do with a group of students unsupported. It's and the size of the class definitely matters for individual support, and the amount of time that students have for learning also is a big factor. And lastly, the other issue that we'll have to see as we get students back into buildings is what are the effects of this long-term sustained trauma that we've all been undergoing. And so having the mental health resources there, the social services that are needed, again, none of this comes free. And we have known that we don't have enough counselors in the schools. We're not meeting the recommended guidelines for ratios there. We know that we don't have the psychological services and other supports that we needed in normal times. Well, these are certainly not normal times, and students are going to be having great needs in those areas.
If there's a teacher who has a pre-existing health condition and does not want to return to the classroom because they are afraid of getting the infection, are you supportive of allowing that teacher to teach remotely? And what would that look like?
Yeah, well, first, as we said, in school, going back to buildings, students being back in buildings is not going to be 100% of the time. It's going to be a portion of their week. So right there, we know that there's going to be distance learning continuing. We've been advising our teachers to take advantage of the ability to apply for ADA accommodations. There's also family leave that folks can take. We certainly don't want anyone in a situation where they are unsafe. So that's, we definitely are advocating for people to have their personal needs met, in consideration as to whether they should be back in-person teaching or whether they should remain in distance learning. But generally speaking, it has to be worked out on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You answered all of my questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that I didn't ask you about?
Oh, well, I think that you've asked a pretty broad scope of questions. I want to thank you for caring to hear what teachers think about the current situation. We are so yearning to be back with our students. We miss them so much, and you know, having little faces on a screen is no substitute for actually being in the classroom and developing those relationships with your students and helping them to develop relationships with one another. And so we're eager for that return to schools. So crossing our fingers that the vaccine is going to be rolling out faster as the weeks ahead come forward, and hoping that we can all be back together in safety and moving through to the end of a very difficult time in our young people's lives and in our own lives.